I'm Gemma Schneider, and this is Where Are They Now? Where Are They Now is a WHRB original series in which I take a deep dive into the insights and experiences of Harvard alumni who have made an impact. They are trailblazers who have touched the world in ways that they could never have planned for, expected, or imagined when they were students. And now, they are eager to tell their unique stories for the benefit of current students and our wider community of listeners out there. This series is made possible by One in a Billion Productions with Mabel Chan, our production partner and sponsor. One in a Billion is a nonprofit educational media company whose mission is to foster Asian voices and deepen cross-cultural understanding through podcast and film productions, blogs, and network events. One in a Billion's founder, Mabel Chan, is also a Harvard alum, class of '93 from the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. She'll be joining us as a regular commentator and co-host on the podcast. In this episode, I am speaking with Divya Narendra, a celebrated entrepreneur and the son of immigrant doctors from India. Divya graduated from Harvard College in 2004 with a BA in Applied Math. He currently serves as the CEO and co-founder of SumZero, an online community where professional investors can share business insights and research. Divya's business acumen dates back to his college years. In 2002, while he was still an undergrad at Harvard, Divya thought of the idea to create what he then described as a social network to connect fellow Harvard students. He joined forces with his classmates Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss to start working on a platform known as HarvardConnection, also known as ConnectU. In their search for an engineer, they eventually found someone to help out, some guy named Mark Zuckerberg. On February 4th, 2004, Zuckerberg launched his own website, then called thefacebook.com, which, like HarvardConnection, would require a harvard.edu email address to be able to register. Divya and the Winklevoss brothers would go on to sue Zuckerberg for, as they put it, stealing their idea. And the rest of the story, as depicted in the 2010 drama The Social Network, is a blend of history and legend. We will touch on this chapter of Divya's early career in our conversation today. How did he feel at the time? What lessons did he learn? And what would he do differently today? But we also unpack the layers of Divya's character and experiences, college and post-college, that can't be found on film or in the press. If you're curious about how Divya got interested in business in the first place, or how he's learned to develop business ideas that stick, you're about to find out. We'll also untangle the sophisticated workings of Divya's entrepreneurial mind as we discuss the birth and growth of his current company, SumZero. I loved getting to know the real Divya Narendra, not just the one born out of the creative liberties of director David Fincher. And I know that you will too. Finally, at the end of this episode, our contributing commentator and co-host Mabel Chan will share her thoughts about this interview, a commentary about this question: how do you find your competitive edge at Harvard? Hi, Divya. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Thanks, Jenna. I'm looking forward to it.
Something that I want to start off with, rewinding 20 years-ish is when you first got to Harvard. Am I right with that timeline?
Yeah, it's been 21 years. I was there from 2000 to 2004.
So where was your mind at when you first got to Harvard in terms of what you were interested in, what you thought you wanted to do with your life, et cetera, et cetera?
I was interested in the guitar. I grew up playing classical guitar and got really into, rock and roll and heavy metal as a middle schooler and high schooler. And when I came to college, I brought a couple of my guitars and an amp with me. I used to just play in Holworthy with my amp out the window. It's pretty funny. Career-wise, I was very not confused, but certainly didn't have any kind of high conviction either in terms of what I wanted to do. My parents were immigrants from India, both physicians. and most of my uncles and aunts were physicians. And so, medicine was kind of like on the table. I wasn't fixated on it. I came with an open mind. I was an applied math concentrator, and which, by the way, is not the most like practical skill set. And then it was really, my junior year that I kind of stumbled on entrepreneurship. And I think, entrepreneurship is one of these cool disciplines in that, you don't need to be a genius to be a great entrepreneur. Like, you don't need to be the like the best at finance or the best at dissecting legalese or anything like that. And in fact, I think what makes for some of the greatest entrepreneurs is just like kind of a healthy mix of like persistence with sort of like problem solving, but it's a little bit of a relief from the typical Harvard career track. Because if you go into I take my brother, for example. My brother was definitely smarter than me. He was a pure math major at Harvard.
Well, I also think there are different ways to be smart.
Oh yeah. But like he was like, call it a pure like technical
hard skills.
Yeah, like he was definitely better than me. I don't want to say he was like running circles around me, but I just remember, him telling me like how hard it was to to perform relative to the other math majors in college. And so when he was applying for medical school, like he had to compensate for a lower GPA than a lot of the other students applying to medical school. And it can be discouraging, right? But if you're going into that field, you're sort of asking for it because they're just a lot of people who are very driven, and there's a limited number of sort of seats or spots, right? I think what entrepreneurs try to do is like almost avoid all that entirely, right? Like they're like, how do we bring fresh intellectual horsepower and a different way of thinking to an industry or sub-industry that maybe is maybe has not been innovated upon before. That's kind of the fun of it. It sort of makes something that's maybe from a distance like very risky feel less risky, because you're just taking a different approach.
Yeah. So essentially what you're getting at is building something that's so different from what already exists that you don't really have that competition.
Yeah, that's something that's always on my mind, because I would say kind of that broadly, competition is like on every entrepreneur's mind. Like if you run a business, you probably to some degree lose sleep over competition. I mean, that's kind of your job. It's kind of like a sport in the sense that there are different ways to approach that. I mean, like for some people, it's just playing really good offense. For some people, it's being very defensive, but I think it's definitely, it has to be part of your thought process in terms of how you craft a particular product or service, a particular marketing kind of go-to-market plan. You have to be keenly aware of like what else is out there.
Something that I'm curious about is, I know that when you started Connect U, it was kind of driven by your own personal experiences at college, you kind of seeing in that environment what students might be interested in. So a similar kind of thing. What was the genesis of that idea?
Sure. It was very simple. At the time there was, there were a couple websites that were growing in popularity. Friendster was one, MySpace was another. Craigslist was quite popular as well. And what hit me as I was, using these, and also there were a lot of dating websites that were getting very popular. So like there was one called AmericanSingles.com.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah. These were, I can't remember if Match was even around then, but I think they may have been, and they may have owned like American Singles or one of these similar properties. And so I just remember thinking like, wow, like here's kind of, a growing trend in the industry. But what I noticed was lacking in all of these websites was any sort of quality control through, through membership, right? Like if you were on MySpace, it wasn't easy to find other people to connect with, who shared your interests, and there was not really a great way to verify identity. And so it hit me, again, this was like December of 2002 or something, that in the university environment, everyone had a university email address. So that harvard.edu address was a very strong identifier, and it just created a natural affinity between anybody who would in theory exist on some kind of online network where that was a membership criteria. And so like the sort of light bulb was that, hey, here's a very simple screening tool that we can use to create an online community where people have real overlap and sort of real affinities that that can be verified. And it just got me excited. And I kind of knew then that, this could be something I do as a job, like carving out your own destiny as opposed to just taking a job somewhere else. And so I started, thinking through like, who should I get involved? And there was a guy actually in my dorm. I was in Pforzheimer House who.
Oh, me too.
What's that? Oh, you were also in FOHO?
Yeah, I haven't lived there yet, but I'm going to be.
You're a rising sophomore. Okay, yeah. Got it. So there was a guy in my dorm who was a year ahead of me, but he had gotten an internship at Google and was going to be, he was on track to working there full time. This was when Google was pre-IPO. And so we were just friends, but I knew he did some web programming at the time. PHP was a very popular programming language. So he knew PHP and told him about the concept. He got super excited. And then I thought, like I should probably get some people who are more knowledgeable on marketing and interested in terms of just like building the business, not technical co-founders, but more kind of business co-founders. And the Winklevoss twins were in my dorm as well. We were in the same blocking group. And, I reached out to them about it, and they just like immediately were like, this is awesome. Like, let's go do this.
How did you actually, I feel like it's so hard you have an idea and that's one thing, like so many people get ideas, they pop into people's heads all the time, but actually having the initiative and drive to then go act on that idea and execute it and find the right people. So that's my first question. And then the other is, when you were looking for people on board, whatever, when you met Mark, what would you have done differently, if anything?
A lot of people definitely do have ideas and don't act on them, but I think the reason is that they don't develop those ideas, and I think you have to spend time, again, like becoming an expert on the domain that you plan on serving, right? And now with social networking, first of all, it was kind of like a brand new, concept, like online social networking. Like, well, what is that? And so, looking at what was out there, I just did a search on like, what are all the different venues where like people are kind of doing this? And, again, like, what are we bringing to the table that's different? Like, you just have to like really know that inside and out. So, to your question, your second question, which is like, what are things I would do differently? One of the things that we didn't do as well as we probably could have with Mark was, maybe like clarify the exact relationship that we had, in terms of like what that partnership was going to look like over time, based upon contributions. Like what you'll notice with a lot of venture cap businesses is that employees are often compensated with incentive stock options, or ISOs. Those options are typically granted over a 4-year term with a 1-year cliff, and not to sound like technical or jargony, but these structures are in place to maintain the overall like fairness within the business.
To what extent do you feel like, in terms of bringing people on board, it's having those structures in place, but also just like knowing the person, trusting your gut, whatever, stuff like those. So like, what is the balance between the interpersonal elements and then also actually?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the beginning that interpersonal chemistry is really, really important. I mean, you want to have like the utmost confidence in your teammates, especially when the company's small, because everyone's wearing a lot of hats. They're expected to do a lot. And I would say it's even in our case with with Connect You, like I think one of the problems was that we didn't know Mark personally. And so it was always like he was a little poker face. Like it wasn't like we had sort of different circles of friends. And, I think that ultimately kind of hampered our ability to truly form like the right type of bond, which he ultimately formed, at least for on a temporary basis with his roommates who, some of his personal friends who he ended up co-founding Facebook with.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. There's a lot to unpack. One is that I think when this happened when you were in college and you kind of found out about it, who around you, so school administrators, your friends, what was the dialogue there like? And yeah, I'll start with that.
The school administrators were, yeah, I don't know if you saw the movie, but there was that scene with Larry Summers, and in real life, the three of us went there. In the movie, they just had the twins in the office. But I mean, I remember sitting there, just kind of feeling like a deer in headlights. I mean, I guess I shouldn't have expected much, but his reaction was just stone cold. Like, this isn't my problem. Like, have fun dealing with it, right? And it was a very sobering experience, and I think sort of a reflection of maybe the business community at large. Like, the reality is, business is extremely competitive, and it's ruthless, actually. When you look at you take a look at like big tech today, right? All of these companies are now stepping on each other's toes. So I think if you're going to go into that, into the field of business, like you kind of have to expect that, that people are going to be nipping at your toes, and like there's not a lot of sympathy out there. Now, I would say in the university environment, these schools should create, let's just say, a slightly less ruthless environment that does promote collaboration, and isn't, completely cold and ruthless. But that was our first kind of brush with reality, in a sense, and I think it was just a very sobering experience.
Yeah, I think even now, and this is in things that don't always even relate to business or work, but I think there's so many kids have so many bouts with administration even now. So I think,
yeah, well, I think the younger you are, you tend to be more trusting. Like we were, I mean, I hate to say it, but like as you get older, you do get a little bit more skeptical, and maybe in some cases jaded by, like just what's out there. Right. And I think that's kind of like, it's a hard lesson to learn, but it's a really important one. It's like, you want a healthy dose of skepticism, in life, and certainly in business. Right. I would say when we were in college, like we were probably too far on that spectrum of maybe being like trusting. And then, our world's just kind of turned upside down. We were like, oh, like this is how it's going to be. So, we kind of had to grow up pretty quickly in that regard.
Did you guys try keeping Connect You up for a while after?
Yeah. We actually, unfortunately we were probably 4 months behind, but at Connect You's peak, we probably had well over 100,000 users across different schools in Boston. But, it was obvious that it was not going to be a Facebook competitor, because, Facebook had 8,000 people on, their website. This was back when it was called thefacebook.com. Within the first like 10 days. So they had the entire Harvard campus was on that website immediately. And within months, it was like, we were talking, it was in the millions, right? So it just became this snowball, which fit, what I predicted, right? It was like, this is exactly what's going to happen. And that's what he ended up doing. Again, that viral growth. I mean, people don't appreciate the power of exponential growth, but like when it happens, I mean, it's just, it's a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah. I mean, one thing is that I feel like that idea too. I watched the movie so long ago, but isn't there a thing like getting there first or whatever? That's like,
well, yeah, they refer to that as first mover advantage. And first mover advantage is really, really important when you're talking about a business where there is a viral growth sort of marketing component, and also where you have two similar products, right? Like, this was, ConnectU was the same concept, right? And in fact, like the Facebook profile pages and all, like, were very similar to kind of what were in our original, our original plans. And so, it's not like we were able to come up with like a radically new idea for a different concept 4 months later. Like our whole thing was like, let's just go ahead and launch it and see where it goes. But I think, it was pretty clear early on that our only recourse was going to be litigation.
You had mentioned earlier that one of the inspirations for ConnectU is a dating thing. And I did see something like Mark Zuckerberg called in some investigative report thing that like he called that the dating app. Was there some dating feature on ConnectU?
Dating to me is just a subset of connecting people. So what's ironic is that that's exactly what Facebook is today. Like dating is a subset of Facebook. In fact, there's like a dating tab on the on their mobile app. And so to me, that argument is more semantics. Like it's, the point is like, these are tools that that are, when you look at HarvardConnection or ConnectU versus Facebook, like they're both tools that contained profile information of university affiliated students, where they're able to message each other based upon, sort of profile information that was basically the same, like very much overlapping information. So
yeah, so another thing you mentioned briefly, kind of how networking is it allows for so much. And I know that your current business, so SumZero, that's also it's a networking platform, but it has a specific niche and you focus on professional investors getting on there. I want to talk a little bit about that. I also want to talk about how you thought of that idea. And my question also is whether going back into entrepreneurship, launching a business, that's a hard choice after you kind of had not the best experience. So what was that like?
It was just another fun roller coaster. So I spent a couple years in finance after the whole ConnectU thing went down, and I spent 2 years in M&A at Credit Suisse in New York, and I spent a year working at a hedge fund in Boston, where I really got to learn about investing and some of the mechanics of investing and valuation considerations and things like that. And so SumZero was really just like a culmination of having both like social networking experience, but also having worked at a hedge fund. And so, I decided to build this community of professional investors. And, before SumZero, nobody was aggregating the investment insights from professional money managers. There were chat boards you could go to if you wanted to just hear what random people had to say about stocks, kind of like Reddit, for example. But if you wanted to hear what like the professional guys had to say, there was really no place to do it. You had to know them personally and give them phone calls, right? And so I built out SumZero as this place for professional money managers to share research. And today we have over 20,000 members globally, and there's a huge repository of research on the platform.
Yeah, and I, before this interview, I was just looking. It was my first time like diving deep into what SumZero does, but I found it really interesting. And I'm so naive as to what goes on in the finance world. My brothers know a lot because they're both in finance, but I I definitely don't. I should learn more at some point. But I will say, like, what initially, as someone who doesn't have much experience in it, thought of, made a connection to, which I know it's so different, is like I thought about Wall Street bets on Reddit also. And I'm curious, given the level of sophistication and rigor that is inherent in SumZero, what you think of groups like that.
It's literally like the polar opposite in terms of philosophy. Like Wall Street bets, it's a subreddit, right? So like, I mean, anybody can join it, but there's just no quality control, so that you have so many accounts that just spit out, either they're rehashing stuff that like everyone over, it's like old news and like doesn't, like everyone knows it, or they're making cursor, like kind of conclusory claims without any backup. Like they're just stating opinions with no real justification. So if you care about the justification, you got to get on SumZero. And one great example of this is that GameStop, which was the subject of
course, yeah,
the Wall Street bets mania, if you will, was written about on SumZero multiple times. Most recently,
wow.
I want to say it was January of 2020, so pre-COVID. So this was like a year before it was in the news. And the guy who wrote the idea on SumZero runs a small fund, I think something like a $25 million fund. He was long GameStop when it was trading for under $4 a share. And his thesis had nothing to do with, a hedge fund short squeeze. It had nothing to do with Gamma or the Greeks or, it had everything to do with the fundamentals of the business and, how GameStop was going to sort of transform its retail model. GameStop right now is at $163 a share, right? So you could have 40 to 50x to your money if you had sort of just read that thesis and bought into it.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. And when is the release coming out for the one that is more open and with a lower barrier to entry?
Oh, it's out. So if you just go to SumZero.com, there's a join button. And if you tell us, you can self-segregate it as an individual investor. If you tell us, you're an individual investor, there are free trials available for all of those three tiers: SumZero Lite, SumZero Premium, and SumZero Elite.
Cool. This all sounds so exciting. And I guess one more thing is that, do you have any advice for people, whether they're young, just out of college students who are looking not only, to maybe embark upon a journey in entrepreneurship, but also more broadly, just the path moving forward, finding what they want to do, finding their niche and developing ideas that work and that are strong, that they can be happy with?
Yeah, I mean, like just at a high level, I think it's really important to choose a career that you are passionate about. This is going to sound almost obvious, but I do think it's important never to lose sight of that long-term passion that you really kind of care about. And if you don't have that, then it's like all about experimentation, right? It's like if you're not sure what it is you really love to do, then you have to experiment and just try things that you think might work.
So you said it sounds obvious or whatever. I think that people sometimes hear that like just a general one-liner about it, but they don't actually think deeply into it. And I feel like what you're laying out here is more of a nuanced view of it. And it also relates directly to what you were talking about earlier with your college experiences, where you entered not knowing exactly what you wanted to do, thinking maybe you would take something that was a very clear path, and then finding entrepreneurship and finding what you are passionate about. So I think you're a perfect model of that. And I think it's great advice. So
yeah, like it's like, if you're really honest with yourself, I mean, that's the thing. Like, people have to kind of be like honest with themselves and like just, how much do they really care about what they're doing? And, it's not easy. Like, I would say you should expect some degree of struggle. I was actually watching an interview yesterday, and the interviewer mentioned the statistic that there's something like 50% of the S&P 500 companies are run by immigrants. I just thought it was an interesting statistic, right? Because, you kind of think through like, well, why would that be? And, I think for a lot of folks who are coming from, let's say, outside the country into the US, like, they have had to face adversity. They've had to overcome that adversity. They probably feel like outsiders, to an extent. And I think all of that is just like very motivating.
I also think that there's a certain skill set that you need to have, a certain level of grit and perseverance. And when you've had life experiences that have already taught you those skills, it probably relates to that too. That when you come across a challenge, you're going to be more likely to not shy away, but instead just tackle it head on.
Agreed. Preaching to the choir.
Thanks so much to Divya Narendra for joining us today. Now it's time for a few words from our contributing commentator and co-host, Mabel Chan of One in a Billion, our production partner and sponsor of Where Are They Now?
Hi, Gemma. After listening to this interview, what strikes me most about Divya is how incredibly comfortable he is in his own skin. Unlike many Harvard undergraduates I know who are Asian Americans with immigrant parents who are physicians, Divya shows no obvious signs of stress or pressure at all from his family to be a doctor. He even confessed that as an applied math concentrator at Harvard, he had no high convictions for his career. He loved playing rock and roll on his heavy metal guitar with an amp out the window. How refreshing to hear. Personally, I never had pressure from my parents to join the family business in Hong Kong. That's mostly because I grew up in a traditional Chinese patriarchal culture and society at the time. So as a girl, I was pretty much spared from high expectations to perform in the male-dominated world. But many traditional Asian parents that I know have intense expectations that their Harvard sons and daughters should buy into the typical Harvard career tracks, that they should become investment bankers, doctors, lawyers, or engineers. To most, those are seen as stable and respectable professions. But Divya wanted a new and different approach to thinking about his life and career. He wanted to avoid the medical school track and was glad that he did for a variety of reasons. One reason was that this track is crowded with fierce competition from many math majors, including students like his older brother at Harvard, whom Divya considers to be much smarter than himself. But I think Divya is just as smart to know that what's required, mostly high scores and numbers to get into medical schools, was not his competitive edge. What is his competitive edge? I think is his curiosity and demands as a consumer and his problem-solving savvy as an entrepreneur in the making. While at Harvard, Divya had used many social networking platforms, as you may recall from the interview, but they lacked what he wanted, quality control. So he followed his nose to fix this problem by talking with a dorm roommate with computer programming skills. Soon after, he talked to enough college buddies who would all get excited about creating a social networking platform that would require a harvard.edu email address to join. That was the signifier of quality connection and a trusted source that he was looking for, and many people agreed with him. Thus, an enterprise was born, and that was HarvardConnection, later renamed ConnectU. Today, his SumZero networking platform operates on the same idea of quality control as his product's differentiator. That's his competitive edge. So what if you're not cut out for the typical Harvard career tracks? As Divya candidly said, quote, I stumbled on entrepreneurship in my junior year. You don't need to be a genius to be the greatest entrepreneur. It takes a healthy mix of problem solving and persistence, end quote. And I think that's how life speaks to you. You can stumble on something. It gives you a lead or a clue. That's one dot. You share that dot with more trusted friends who get you and will get excited with you about your idea. Together, you form a team. Connecting the dots, as Steve Jobs famously said, is something you can do only by looking backward. So, looking back, can you connect the dots in your life and take important risks? Send me your thoughts. I love feedbacks.
This has been Where Are They Now? Produced by myself, Gemma Schneider at WHRB News in Cambridge, in collaboration with 1 in a Billion Productions with Mabel Chan. The music for our show was created by Dash Chin of WHRB News. You can also learn more about our podcast partner and sponsor, 1 in a Billion Productions, by checking out oneinaBillionVoices.org or Mabel's podcast, 1 in a Billion, an interview show about Asian culture and society, one person at a time, on Apple iTunes, PRX, or SoundCloud. Thank you again for listening to this week's episode of Where Are They Now? Tune in for another episode of Where Are They Now on WHRB 95.3 FM at the same time next week, same place. In the meantime, learn more about our podcast and catch up on old episodes by visiting our website, whrb.org. You can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or PRX.